Welcome to another episode of Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm your host, Eric Nevins, and this is episode number 24. I can't believe it's been that many, to be honest with you. If you haven't heard each and every episode, I would encourage you to go back in the archives. There's some great stuff in there, some great interviews and conversations where people have shared their stories that really mean a lot to certainly me and to them. And I think there's a lot for you to learn. I hope that you find that to be true. Well, today I have a really just fascinating story for you. I hope that you'll enjoy it. Today, we have a conversation with a gentleman who is a church accountant. He's also getting a counseling degree. We talk a lot about how those two go together, and this gentleman is also a wonderful fantasy football fanatic. Although we didn't actually talk about fantasy football, I think that's because I'm dominating the league right now. I totally just jinxed myself, and I could be wrong, but if you see my guest run into him, you can just ask him about that. Anyway, today my guest is Jesse Bean. Jesse shares his story about how he grew up going to Christian churches, how he sort of walked away from his faith, and then how God brought him back. It's fascinating. I call this episode Grace is Greater Than Effort with Jesse Bean. Jesse, thanks for sitting down with me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing it. You and I have known each other for a little bit and heard a little bit of your story at church, and I'm just excited to have you share.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to share and see where this goes.
Yeah, it'll be good. Well, I never quite know where the conversation's going, and sometimes it ends up in places I didn't expect, which I think is awesome, and I just chalk up to the Holy Spirit wanting to get out something from you. So
for sure.
Why don't you just start out and share a little bit about who you are, what you're doing now, and kind of what your circumstances are, and then we'll go back into your story and dig in.
All right, that's great. So right now I'm serving as the accountant for South Fellowship Church. So love the role. Absolutely feel great about where I'm at. And I sort of see it as a transition job. My background and career, most of my professional career has been in accounting, and I'm in grad school right now pursuing a degree in counseling, which is where I really want to take my life going forward. And so, yeah, I found this job that allows me some flexibility while I'm in grad school, and it's sort of a mix between using my accounting skills and shifting my life towards a more ministry focus, or at least a focus where I can invest in people's lives more directly.
Yeah. I'm interested to find out how that came about. Maybe that'll come up as we get going.
Definitely.
Here. So where'd you grow up?
So military family, so kind of all over.
Yeah.
But we settled down in Colorado Springs probably when I was in junior high, and so spent the junior high school years down on the north side of Colorado Springs, which if folks don't know a lot about that, it's known for a very conservative Christian type of environment. Focus on the Family is there, Compassion International, New Life Church, which is a very large evangelical mega church. So a lot of kind of conservative Christian influence in that area.
Yeah. Okay. Was it a Christian family, or was it?
Yeah, it was. It was definitely a church-going family. There were 3 of us kids right close to each other, and then a younger brother who came about a decade after the cluster of the 3 of us. But for most of that childhood, I mean, we started off in Awana and the Boy Scouts, and we're active in church throughout my childhood. Yeah. So my parents definitely took it seriously and tried to instill a Christian faith in us from early on.
Okay. That's great. So did you, tell me what was your story with Jesus? Did you come to Christ as a result of all those things, or what was that like?
Yeah, I definitely did. I certainly don't remember my conversion experience as a lot of folks do, but got to know the Lord well from an early age, and especially when I was in high school, I became real involved in my church. I did go to New Life Church, a very large conservative megachurch there in the Springs, and so I really dove into that, got involved, loved the social group that I had there, and really had some experiences that I felt like were genuine, and certainly would have at the time said I was very connected to the Lord, and really engaged in that in a wholehearted way. You know, kind of serving the Lord as best as I knew how, going to summer camps and all those types of things.
Sure. Yeah, so that's a pretty man, I don't want to put it in a way that is demeaning because it's not what I mean at all, but it's a pretty common Christian story, right?
Absolutely.
Come to Christ.
Absolutely.
As a kid. I always actually like those stories where you grow up and you never really know, like when you weren't a believer, when you were.
Yeah.
Partly because I have kids. And that's how I want their experience to be. But also because I think it's growing up, my perception was you had to kind of have that moment, right?
Yeah.
Have a kind of big thing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me to hear that that's not always the case, and actually it's okay if it's not, because the point is to walk with the Lord, not to have a shining light experience.
Yeah, in hindsight, I'm certainly thankful for the periods of struggle with my faith that occurred as I got out of high school.
Yeah.
And, some of that felt somewhat dramatic in the sense that immediately after high school, I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And so kind of going off to boot camp takes you out of that sort of Christian bubble and that culture where my friends believed what I believed, and it was sort of comfortable to be a believer in Christianity.
Right.
To a culture where it was less common, less well known, and less accepted, or it certainly wasn't the cool thing to do anymore. And I think that refined my Christian experience, and the response that I had at that time was to dive deeper into it. So I came back from boot camp being a reservist in the Marine Corps, and continued to live in Colorado Springs for about a year after that. And while I was serving, my Marine Corps reserve duties, kind of starting some community college, looking for where I would hopefully start a full-time college career, I really dove into the church even more than I ever had before, and really joined pretty intensive prayer teams and just college teams that were really involved with local community and in missions, and really devoted myself to my faith in a very, very active way, regularly fasting and again, attending probably 2 to 3 church services a week, 2 to 3 prayer meetings a week, and that became even more foundational for me.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So that's a lot. I mean, most people don't even go to one prayer service, so that's a lot if you're doing 2 or 3
Absolutely.
a week. Yeah, it makes me wonder what that experience was like. Is that, I mean, you weren't probably just sitting around asking God for things.
Well, certainly that became part of my story, because I think at least what happened to me in that environment was that, again, I sort of went back to New Life Church in the Springs, back to a large community of believers, and it was cool to be sold out for the Lord and to really be all in, and almost in a competitive sense, we all wanted to be the best Christian or to pray the most. And so, and I'm a competitive guy. And so I wanted to do that as well. And a lot of that was genuinely wanting a deep encounter with the Lord.
Yeah. But
the way that I felt like I was able to do that was through performing as many things as I could to get closer to the Lord. So it was a lot about effort and achievement, and I ended up enrolling for college at Oral Roberts University down in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And a lot of the reason for that was the leadership of the church I went to had all gone to Oral Roberts, and it just felt like the way I could invest even deeper into my Christian faith, to go to a Christian private school, even knowing at the time I wanted to study business and didn't necessarily want to be, quote, in ministry. I just wanted that to remain a major focus of my life.
Yeah, interesting. That so I had one thought I wanted to go back to was that period of kind of, you call it competitive. I don't know if it's just competitive. It's like that period of where you're doing things, like, is sort of your spirituality is pretty regular on the spiritual journey. It's a piece of what I think I've been having this thought lately, and I don't want to put it too strongly, but it's like there is no morality to where you are in your spiritual life, right?
Okay.
By which I mean, it's not good or bad, right? Sometimes we look back on those things and we go, "Oh, that was not completely correct."
Yeah.
Well, it's just that may not be true. It's really just where you were, and that was the way that you knew to encounter God, and that He kind of meets us in those things.
Yeah.
But I don't know if does that strike you as too strong?
No, it doesn't at all, and I appreciate you saying that because as I've thought some about my journey, I am extremely appreciative for that time in my life.
Yeah.
While there's some things I even feel embarrassed about, as I talk about Oral Roberts University, it's sort of controversial. A lot of things, they're known for a healing ministry and speaking in tongues, and I believed strongly in a lot of those things while I was there. And while a lot of my beliefs have shifted since then, I'm appreciative that I was able to go through those experiences. And I can see how, even in the shifting of my beliefs, they're beneficial to me, or they feel like they carry some meaning for me.
Right. So what would you say is a way that those things kind of shaped you? How would you say that that's changed kind of how God shaped how you see Him, maybe?
I mean, I think now what strikes me now is the recognition of where a lot of the gospel that I believed in then was about effort and about achieving for the Lord great works, or by being able to be as moral as possible, to be pure and to just sort of follow the commands of Christian living, evangelical Christian living.
Yeah.
And the better you could do that, the better Christian you were, the more accepted by God you were. And I think I would say that I don't know how that directly serves me right now. I think that it helps me relate to people who are going through those types of experiences. As I look to join a career where I'm engaging with people and their stories and encountering them, just gives me an understanding of some different ways of being, some different thought processes that hopefully will allow me to kind of sit with folks and understand where they're at in their journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. It's just it's a period of time that a lot of us go through where doing is the spirituality, and
Absolutely.
I think it's valuable. It is good to learn that way.
Sure.
Anyway, okay, so that's interesting. Why did you go to the Marines? Was that just because that's what you knew?
Actually, it was more out of rebellion than anything else. My mom and dad had both spent some time in the Air Force. They were officers in the Air Force. So I did have a patriotic sense that I wanted to serve my country. But doing the Marine Corps was, I don't know, a more hardcore or intense way to do that. And I was in a mode of competitiveness. I think I had a high view of myself in high school. And so I wanted the biggest challenge possible. And so that felt to me like, the way I could challenge myself the most and I think demonstrate to myself that I had what it takes to be, I don't know, superior, just to really do life well.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, that was interesting. I wondered why you kind of did that.
Well, the recruiters told me that it would help me pick up women in the uniform too, so that certainly didn't hurt.
I don't know if I should ask if it worked or not. That's maybe a different part of the story.
We'll get there, I'm sure.
Okay, right. Very good. Well, good. So you came back and you went to Oral Roberts.
I did. So I had started college there with the intent to kind of serve in the Marine Corps part-time while getting my education. But my first semester in college was the semester of 9/11.
Oh, okay.
So the world was at peace when I joined the Marine Corps, and I assumed I could float through. But of course, the world changed that day. So I remember being in class when it happened and realizing, boy, certainly it was going to change the lives of a lot of Americans, but certainly reservists in the Marine Corps. We knew we were likely to become more involved than we thought we would have been before that. And that ended up being true. I finished that semester at Oral Roberts and then was activated to go serve stateside here. I went to Camp Lejeune for a little over a year. and then came back, got back into school again, and then really just a couple months after coming back into school was when we invaded Iraq. So that was in March of 2003. So I was activated in January or February of '03, and ended up being shipped overseas and served about 6 months in Iraq in 2003 there.
Wow.
So yeah, it was really interesting to see the way that the Lord had shifted my life. You know, a lot happened there that I didn't expect, and a lot that helped refine me. I mean, I guess the story of my Iraq experience kind of leads to the biggest change process that the Lord's used in my life. That a lot have happened sort of all at once. So
yeah,
please dive into that.
Share that. That'd be great.
I mean, I think that serving in Iraq in and of itself was a time when my worldview changed and shifted a lot. Having come from a upper middle class conservative Christian environment, I believed a lot of the things that upper middle class conservative Christians are often known for. The conservative political viewpoints, you know, patriotism, and I think sort of an understanding of gospel truth that manifested itself in a way that sort of said, hey, we as American Christians have it correct. We're right about what we believe. And I really bought into that in a big way and felt like I knew truth really well. So then went over to Iraq and was spending time in a, I don't want to say opposite, but very different culture, where the belief system was totally different. The way they structured society and set up life was completely different. And as I went to experience that, my reaction to it became a sense of compassion for those people, for the people of Iraq, for their belief systems and for their way of living life. And I think I had been sort of told and bought into the idea that their way was wrong and was not correct, and we needed to bring our way to them and to sort of give them truth.
Yeah.
And it just felt that position felt very uncompassionate for me, and it made me really question what I had believed, what I had been told, and I just thought, you know, this doesn't feel right to me. This doesn't feel like a good way of being in the world.
Yeah.
And a way that we can share who we are with people in a way that they would want to receive it and that it would be welcoming to them. It just felt harsh and overbearing and really caused me to question a lot of what I had spent so much time knowing was true, felt very untrue.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what, do you have a story of how that kind of played itself out? Like, when did you realize maybe all these convictions that I had are not quite as, scare quote, true as I thought?
Yeah, that's a good question. There really was. I mean, when we first got there, we ended up setting up our main position in a city called Nasiriyah, kind of southern part of Iraq, and we had found an Iraqi army training camp that we had basically taken over. It was mostly abandoned by the time we got there, but that's really where we set up our main position, kind of right outside the city. And so we're living in these really rundown barracks of former Iraqi army members, and although I couldn't read or write the Iraqi language, I got an opportunity to kind of see what these young men training in the Iraqi army saw and experienced and what their lives were like. And I just very much felt like if I had been born into this culture instead of the one I was born into, I would have very much followed this same belief system and kind of sold out to it and believed it deeply. And even stood up and decided to fight for that in the same way I had what I had grown up believing in America. And it just made me feel like my belief system was based on my cultural upbringing and really nothing else. It wasn't that I had looked at all of the world religions and selected Christianity for its most fundamentally, for being, most fundamentally true. It was just what my parents believed, what everyone else believed, and so it's what I believed.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think having that realization just really made me question it and feel like, you know what, this feels like a circumstance that I believe this, and that didn't feel like enough for me.
Yeah. So how did you handle that?
I suppose not well in a lot of ways.
Okay.
I mean, by and large, I decided to forego everything that I had held so tightly onto as a belief system, and basically, for the most part, walked away from Christianity, and just sort of said, "Hey, it's still probably likely that I have a creator, that there's a being out there who brought me into existence, and it's likely that that creator cares about me. I at least felt like it wasn't a design that just created us and left us alone. That there was interaction there available.
Yeah.
But at that point, that's really all I had. So I kind of held on to those two things. But especially as I came home from Iraq, there were additional shatterings to my worldview and my belief system that really caused everything else to crumble.
Yeah, so I think I know where you're going there, but do you want to go ahead and share that story? Because that's...
Yeah, absolutely. So while I was gone, I had gotten a notification that my stepmother had died. So this was a gal my father had been married to for just a couple of years. My parents had separated while I was in high school, so my father had been remarried for a short time. So found out that she had died, and got a Red Cross message to be able to come home from Iraq to sort of support my family in that time of crisis. So as I got back home, lo and behold, I found out that she had been murdered, and that my father was the prime suspect in that case. And so as time went by and things unfolded, really just discovered that I came to an understanding that I had believed my father was guilty of that crime, and that that over the years he did eventually get convicted of that. A jury found him guilty, and so he's in prison, and that's where he'll be for the rest of his life. So
Yeah.
So obviously a large shattering of my father figure, of a man who for most of my childhood I had a good relationship with. He had some struggles in his life that were difficult as he transitioned out of the Air Force around the time I was in high school. He struggled to find work after that. Had some financial difficulties. I think his divorce from my mom was hard on him, and he didn't respond well to that, and ended up allowing himself to fall into some patterns of addiction, and just depression, that he wasn't in a healthy relationship, and ended up getting to a place where he obviously did something that destroyed his life, that changed his life forever. And I don't know that I fully understood the kind of subconscious psychological effects that had on me, but it really shook me in a deep way.
Yeah.
That basically who I had felt my father was as I was growing up, I felt like I couldn't believe in anymore. And that again, I just felt very lied to, and that the foundation of what I had built my life around was wrong or was untrue, or certainly that it didn't have any worth anymore.
Right. So did that include? So you kind of added that on top of what you were already feeling about your faith, or about maybe the constructs of your faith. We should put it that way, because I think you were really clear to say, well, I knew that God, or I thought that God was still there and probably still loved me. So there's still that sort of foundation of faith, because faith is really who we think God is, right?
Sure.
But there's all these constructs that we build up that kind of seem to come or be stripped away, even maybe.
Yeah.
In a pretty dramatic way. So tell me how that. So what did that do? I mean, you kind of alluded to it, I guess, or spoken to that. But so you see your dad kind of just the shattering you said of your image of him. What did that do to your image of God at that point? If you were already kind of how long ago is this, by the way?
That happened in late 2003.
Okay.
So we're still in 2003, and yeah, I can tell you that my immediate response to that was okay. I remember my older brother and I sort of getting together and figuring out how we were going to respond to this. And there was a lot of family turmoil that was happening, and a lot of logistics and relational things we had to respond to. But I do remember we had this sense of we need to live our lives in a different way than our father. Yeah. So how can we then do that? And a lot of it was we have to basically try even harder than ever before. Like now we recognize how far you can go if you allow yourself to make poor decisions and allow those to affect you and don't respond to those well. So we really did sort of try even harder. And I think for me in particular, I did cling to some of the examples of strong Christians that had lived good lives that I could try to model my life after. And at the time, the person who I clung to most strongly was our lead pastor at New Life Church, who I had grown up under, who was Ted Haggard.
Yeah.
And whose kids I had gone to school with and whom I had some relationship with. But I really looked up to him, and I really modeled my life after him in a lot of ways. And it was about a year after my dad's crime that Ted Haggard lost his ministry.
Yeah.
And he some sin issues were revealed in his life, where he was found for soliciting male prostitution, for allegedly using drugs, and his ministry crumbled pretty much overnight.
Yeah.
So
I remember
I think that was the final that was the final leg I was standing on. Was trying to. I felt like after my dad fell, if I could live my life the way Ted Haggard lived his life, I would be okay. And then it became, that won't work either.
No, well, I mean, just even to hear that statement, it's jarring to go, nope, not true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's more there. It's interesting that you guys got together to go, okay, what are we going to do? It prompted self-reflection, not even anger at him necessarily. I'm sure that there's more to that, but prompted you to go, okay, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, even then, the response continued to be somewhat similar. I still have to keep trying here. I can't. These aren't the ways I want my life to be, what I want my legacy to be. So let me keep trying. And at that point, there was very little faith involved. But I decided, okay, I'm going to work harder in school. I'm going to get a good degree. I'm going to get a good job. I'm not going to make the types of financial mistakes that my father had made. I'm going to not make the types of relational mistakes I'd seen him and others make. So I worked to be moral and to build a strong life for myself, really without God at all at that time. So the effort continued to be what sustained me through life. I am thankful that I feel like at that time there was, for lack of a better term, there was a tug on my heart that I felt like the Lord wasn't willing to let me go. And I really, there was a piece of me that wouldn't abandon my faith entirely. I did believe that God existed, and I desired Him still, even though I was pretty fed up with Him and knew I couldn't rely on Him. He allowed me to hang around. He kept calling me back, and when I say calling me back, not audibly, not in really much of a spiritual way at all, But I do believe there were opportunities while I was in college. I got kind of connected with a Young Life group, and I remember being involved with that and going to meetings and hanging out with people. And I wasn't faking it, but I didn't really believe in what God had to offer. I just wanted to hang around people who did. I wanted to be around people who still believed in God and still believed He had something good for them. Um, and 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 I think that did help me just have a thread that that I could someday, hopefully, be brought back to the Lord with.
Okay. So what happened then?
So that thread was what I held on to for, I want to say, about the next decade. I continued to rely on my own strength and my own effort to bring about the life that I wanted, that I felt like I had to live. And yeah, faith was a very, very minimal part of that. But I was able to make life work for me for the most part. I had a good job. I went Big Four public accounting after college. Got a CPA license, and things were going generally well for me. But it was in that process that I met and started dating the gal who would become my wife. She was a believer, and so I went to church with her because she was cute, and I wanted to be around her.
That's the story of so many guys, too, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, I'll go.
So that worked. She helped me kind of keep that thread going and that thread alive.
Yeah. Well, and you can look at it as God's provision, even.
No, absolutely, right? Absolutely. Yeah. And I had been around Christianity long enough that I sort of knew the lingo and the terminology to sort of be in church. And again, I don't think I was faking it when I was dating my wife. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be back in relationship with the Lord, but it didn't. I wasn't in relationship with Him, and I sort of knew that I wasn't. And I was just hoping that something miraculous would happen one day that would change that. And I suppose that is what happened, and that was that I got married. And something deeply changed in me the day that I walked down the aisle and committed my life to somebody else. For so many years, I had been working and striving to make my life work, and I was able to do it. However, once I committed my life to somebody else and became responsible for her life as well, it became totally overwhelming. And I instantly felt like I can't work hard enough to make this work. I thought maybe I could last a few years, but I started living in a reality of fear and terror that this amount of effort isn't going to be able to sustain me. That one day I'm going to have an affair, or I'm going to do something that's going to end up destroying my life. And all of this effort that I can put forth can, at best, delay that for 5, maybe even 10 years. But I knew there was no way my effort was going to get me all the way through my life. And I was 30 years old when I got married, and I remember feeling completely exhausted. Just knowing that I have, whatever it is, 30 more years to work and to have a career and to try to make a marriage work. And there's no way I have 30 more years in me. There's no way I'm going to make it that long. I was literally becoming anxious and not functioning well in life. Like, I couldn't perform my job well. And this was a guy who was a Marine, who got a CPA license. Like, I could do everything well, and then all of a sudden it fell apart. And I again, even in that moment, wasn't quite ready to go to the Lord and say, I need you. But I was willing to say, I need help. I need something. And so I eventually reached out to a counselor who I didn't seek a Christian counselor. I didn't know that I had found a Christian counselor, but I found a counselor and began to work with him to explore how I was being in life, the mode in which I was operating in life. And a lot of the ways in which what had happened to me through, my Iraq experience, my father, my pastor, what that caused in me psychologically, and how I had gotten to this place where I couldn't rely on any of those other things, and I couldn't rely on myself anymore either.
Wow. Okay.
So, it was about 10 months of work with a counselor, and I would say some pretty intensive work. We were meeting for 2 hours a week for most of that time, and it was during that time where I began to be able to be open to what it really looked like to be in relationship with the Lord again, to see Scripture in a different way, where it really wasn't about what I needed to do to live the good Christian life, but what was available for me through the gift of grace that I was able to receive. That my effort, I did not have to rely on my effort anymore, and I didn't have to be afraid of who I would become left to my own strength. Because the truth was that my own strength would let me down, and it was just so terrifying knowing that's all I had. So beginning to experience again that there was something else available for me to rely on, took me a long time to get to that level of understanding.
Yeah. Okay, so I got to ask you two questions.
Okay, please.
One, so you had grown up in the church. You were part of a super, the pinnacle of evangelical churches. If
Sure,
I could put it that
absolutely.
way. Had you heard that before? Had you heard grace?
Yes, I had absolutely heard grace before. So I knew grace well.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So were you inoculated? And that's the only word I can come up with. Would you say that, or would you say that you were more, you just didn't know how to receive it, or what? I'm just curious.
I'll say this.
How do you hear this?
I knew grace very well.
Yeah,
and I had never experienced it. Okay. And after that process of 10 months of counseling, it was a day in May of 2012 where I experienced the grace of God unlike I had ever experienced it in my life, before or since. And the Lord absolutely broke my heart and allowed me to feel the depth of how much He cared for me, how much He enjoyed me, and how much hope He had in who He had created me to be. It really was in the experience of that day of being held by my Creator that I no longer had to be terrified of who it is that I would become. And instead I got to live in hope of who I was created to be.
Can you describe that for us? Like what happened? How did you get to that point?
That day, the experience of it?
Yeah, you've kind of been describing what led up to that emotionally, but what were the circumstances around you? You had because you had a very specific date, right? This is when it all changed. What happened?
I got to a point where I was able to fully be honest with God about how I felt. And the short story of that is I was angry.
Yeah.
I had worked my tail off to be who it was I thought I was supposed to be. And basically God let me down. I felt like He had lied to me about my culture and truth and about who other people were in these evil cultures that we look at. and that was all, that was a lie, and I blamed God for that. I was mad at him for what happened to my father, for allowing that to be part of my experience and my story. I was angry about Ted Haggard, and I was just angry that he hadn't been there for me when I felt like I needed him. And I got to a place where I could, in a very deep way, be honest with him about that, and just go to him with my anger, and genuinely ask him those questions, like, where were you? Why did you never show up for me?
Was that in counseling, or was that like
that?
I'm picturing a trail in Colorado somewhere.
No, I mean, so it happened. I mean, I think it had been happening in the months leading up to it. I was doing that more and more, but it really happened right after a counseling session. I came back home alone in my apartment in downtown Denver, and I yelled at God. I yelled at him enough that, and I don't remember the words that I used or what exactly was said, but I remember that that I broke down. I mean, the experience came in the form of me crying and me bawling on the floor and just being broken, knowing that I couldn't do this on my own. I didn't have the effort, and I don't know how to describe the experience except to say, laying on the carpet of my apartment, I felt the Lord wrap His arms around me and just say, it's okay. I'm here, and I love you. And it didn't change what my father had done and what my pastor had done, and honestly, it didn't even make all of my anger go away. But his love was so much bigger than it, that it was as if those things didn't matter anymore. It was a love that was that overwhelming. And I would literally say that the Lord changed who I am that day. That He gave me a new identity. Again, that I did not have to live in fear. That I was able to live in hope.
Yeah.
And that I could rest in who He has created me to be.
Thanks for sharing that. That is, there's nothing I love more than, it'll sound mean, but than hearing stories like that, right? I mean, for you, obviously, it's an emotional time, right? I don't want to make light of that.
Not at all.
But for me, it gives me so much hope too. To hear that God encountered you in that way.
Yeah.
Because He is real. Like, He is, and He will do those things.
Yeah.
If we call out to Him, right?
Yeah.
And man, I just love that. So I love that about Him.
Yeah.
I love that He does that.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love it too. And I can genuinely say that I am thankful for my journey, for the story of my life.
Yeah.
It would be better if many of the things that had happened to me had not. But the Lord has used them in a way that has shaped me into who I am, and I'm thankful for who I am.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a lot of beauty in the process of my journey in life so far.
So what led you to counseling?
Boy, that's another great question. So I remember the months following that encounter with the Lord, where I did operate in a lot of freedom, a lot of hope, and just the weight of my own effort was removed from me. And I did feel like a completely different person. And I was able to love my wife with a lot of freedom, to do my job with a lot of freedom. I was in finance at the time, but I really enjoyed my work. I really believed in it and loved it. And so I continued to do those things, and I think operate in this freedom for a period of about 9 months to a year. And I would say as time went on, life began to feel difficult again, in a lot of the ways that it had before. I often have described that as from the movie The Matrix, where if you've seen that movie, Neo is living in the world as he sees it. And this was sort of my experience up to this point of New Hope in 2012, where at that point the Lord woke me up and showed me the world as it actually is. And so thankful for that experience that now I feel like I get to see the world more fully, that I can engage with people on a deeper level, and really be a part of the world as it truly is. But as Neo experienced in that movie, that didn't make life any easier for me. In fact, in a lot of ways, it made it more difficult. I do think that I've been able to feel more deeply since that experience. But that, and I'm deeply thankful for that, but that has a downside as well. Things hurt me more deeply than they did before that. And I could recognize in my own life where I'll say this, I was much more dependent on the Lord than I used to be. So I literally needed to engage in relationship with the Lord to sustain me. And if I wasn't doing that, I could feel my heart slipping into addiction and selfishness in ways that felt more difficult and much more of a struggle than they had before. The sense of feeling everything in a deeper way didn't make life easier for me. It made it feel more difficult. And that honestly surprised me. I just thought, oh, this new way of being will everything will be better. And I wouldn't go back and change it for anything in the world. But even here now, 4 years after that experience, I would say life has not gotten any easier for me since then. And I've had to struggle through the process of having a relationship with the Lord and having a relationship with other people. And I guess to come back to your question, that was true for me as I decided to change from finance into counseling. A couple of years ago, I sort of felt my passions for finance fading. And I began to feel more passionate about the idea of becoming a counselor. And while I do believe that it was the Lord drawing my heart towards counseling, it didn't manifest itself in a spiritual way. I just wasn't as excited about finance anymore and was excited about this idea of counseling. So I think the Lord was active in my mind as that process unfolded, but it wasn't anything spiritually related as it happened in my life. And my initial reaction to it, again, was anger and was frustration. Because I had felt like the Lord had given me a heart for finance and that I had worked for many years to build a business in finance. And when my passions changed, my go-to was to blame the Lord for it and say, look, why would you have allowed me to spend all this time working so hard to build this business if you were going to draw me towards counseling anyway? Why didn't you do that years ago? Why did you allow me to waste all of this time and effort trying to become something that you knew I wasn't going to continue to be? And it was a really hard process where I spent nearly a year kind of fighting the Lord on it and saying, no, I don't want to do this.
Interesting.
And I think once I finally succumbed to that and said, all right, I'm going to go for it with counseling, you would think then it would be like, all right, I'm sold out, I'm going for it. But no, there were still challenges. I mean, I basically went to my wife and said, honey, I know we're thinking about having kids, but I would like to quit my high-paying finance job that's really secure and go back to grad school to become a counselor, a career that's much less stable and probably will pay me a lot less. So isn't that a great idea?
That's awesome. Yeah, how'd that go?
Not well. Not well.
Exactly as predicted. Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, exactly like it. You would think it would go.
So I was wondering, maybe you answered this, but I was wondering if you felt that, accounting was kind of or finance was your kind of way of controlling, because you were very like, okay, I'm going to just work hard, I'm going to control it, and I'm going to be good. And I wonder if that was kind of your way of controlling it and your achievement kind of thing. And then if the counseling was more like, oh, I'm free. This is actually what God made me to do. But it doesn't sound that way at all. It sounds more like you were like, no, I like where I am, but here's where I'm feeling drawn to, and then God's still kind of maybe working that out in you a little bit.
No, that's a good question, and I think the answer to that is I have absolutely no idea what I was created to do, or what.
It could just be me.
Yeah, like, no, I think accounting and finance, in a sense, was a way of me controlling my own life. But I remember going to family and saying, yeah, I'm getting a degree in accounting. And a lot of family sort of responding to me like, boy, that doesn't really seem like you. Like, I'm kind of outgoing and just goofy. And so it didn't seem like an appropriate fit.
Because all accountants are boring.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you should be boring if you're an accountant.
I apologize to anybody who's listening to this.
Who's an accountant? No, I love accountants. Yeah, absolutely. But it's true. I do think when I was in finance, it was a great fit for me. And I think that the way the Lord used counseling to encounter me is a deep part of my story. And I'm thankful that I feel a draw to get training to offer counseling to others. But as we sit here today, I don't know whether I'll be a counselor someday. Yeah. I don't know if I'll go back to finance. There's still a lot of things about finance that I love. And there's a lot of things about accounting that I love. But I don't feel specifically drawn or called to one thing. Yeah. And that scares the crap out of me a lot of the time. And I'm also learning to become much more thankful for that. Because, I don't know, there is some joy in that mystery. There's some freedom in that, and it allows me room to wonder and to have hope. Yeah. And to just learn to sit back and to try to see where God is drawing me and leading me in my life.
Right.
I never would have thought, even when I started my counseling degree at a seminary, I mean, I didn't necessarily want to go to a seminary to get a counseling degree. I kind of wanted to focus on the mental health and not the spirituality side of counseling. So I kind of said, all right, fine, I'll go to a seminary, but I still would like to be a counselor in more of a mental health setting, with a county or a state, and kind of focus psychologically on people's development, not on their spiritual development per se.
Sure.
And if you had told me, you'll be working at a church someday, even in the role of accounting, I would say, no, I don't want to do that. Yet here I am, and I'm loving it and really enjoying it. So
yeah, you're having to trust God, which I think is always exactly the place where we need to be. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I don't think so. This has been great, and I've enjoyed being able to share some of this. I guess I'll end by saying how thankful I really am for the journey that the Lord has taken me on in my life. Obviously a few things that are somewhat dramatic or difficult in life, but it has been so amazing for me to be able to take opportunities like this to look back at the journey I've been on and be reminded of how faithful the Lord has been to me. Is beautiful, and I'm so deeply thankful for it.
Well, thank you for sharing it. I know that not only is it great for you, and it's great for me to hear, I feel really encouraged, but there's other people out there that are going to listen to this, and it'll be great for them too.
Yeah, well, I hope so. So thank you, Eric.
Thanks, brother. Well, hey, Jesse, thanks so much for sharing your story. Definitely appreciate the time that it took, and I know it was some effort, but I appreciated that you took the time and shared so openly and vulnerably I especially love that story where you talk about how you just felt God's presence and finally could let it all go and stop trying and start experiencing who God is and the love that He had for you. Friends, that is what my desire is for each and every one of you. I definitely hope that in these conversations, if nothing else, if you're in a place like where Jesse was and you're not sure what God is about or whether or not he is out for your good, you can know that he is because of Jesse's experience, and you can seek him out. And I can't promise what that experience will be like for you, but I know that if you seek him, you'll find him. And that's definitely what I'd like to help facilitate in your life and in the life of the people around me. You know, guys, if you enjoyed this show, I'm going to ask you to do just one thing. If you'll go out, find the link to it. You can find it. I'll share it on Facebook at the Halfway There podcast community. You can get it at ericnevins.com. If you enjoyed Jesse's story and you think you know somebody who can benefit from hearing it, would you just share it with your friend? Just share it with somebody. If you put it on social media, that's great. The more this message gets out, I think the more power that it has to change people's lives. So thanks a lot for doing that. And until next time, keep the faith.